The scent hit him first, a familiar aroma weaving through the sterile air of the penthouse that stopped him dead in the hallway. It was impossible. His mother's recipe from a home 8,000 miles and 20 years gone. He followed the smell to the kitchen door, his bodyguards a silent shadow behind him, and watched the new maid place the steaming bowl on the dining table. Her hands trembled. The dish was all wrong, the color slightly off, the garnish clumsy. But as the first taste touched his tongue, memory detonated. The toughest man in the room shattered, and it wasn't about the food at all. Her name was Evelyn. She was the new housekeeper, a week into the job, and this was her desperate, silent gamble. To bridge the chasm between them with a single meal. She knew the boss as Mr. Kang, a man who commanded a quiet empire from this penthouse, whose expression never cracked. But every empire has a secret heart. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her simple, flawed act of cooking would tear open a wound 20 years sealed, and force everyone in that room to witness what happens when absolute control meets uncontrollable memory. 2 weeks earlier, Evelyn stood in a Brooklyn unemployment office, staring at a final eviction notice. Her culinary degree was 8 years and one restaurant collapse ago. Now at 29, she was another face in the city's endless line of almost-wers. Rent was 4 days overdue. Her son's daycare payment was a phantom promise. The listing appeared on her cracked phone screen like a mirage. Live-in housekeeper. Discretion required. Salary, $15,000 a month. The math didn't make sense, which meant the job wasn't what it seemed. But when you're drowning, you grab the rope without checking for knots. The interview was held in a downtown building with no name on the door. A severe Korean man in an impeccable suit, introduced only as Mr. Choi, asked questions that felt like probes. Do you have immediate family in the city? My son Leo, he's 4. And his father? Not in the picture. Are you comfortable with irregular hours and limited transparency regarding your employer's affairs? Evelyn's throat tightened. She thought of Leo's small hand in hers. Yes. The man slid an envelope across the polished desk. This is your first month's salary. You start tomorrow. The address is inside. Pack everything. You will not return to your current residence. The penthouse was a monument to controlled silence. 60 stories above Manhattan, every surface gleamed with a cold, impersonal perfection. The man who owned it, Mr. Kang, was a study in contained power. Early 30s, fair-skinned, with eyes that assessed and dismissed in the same glance. He laid down a single rule on her first day, his voice quiet but absolute. The West Wing is my private office. You do not enter, you do not acknowledge it exists. Break this rule and you will be removed, not punished, erased. Understood. Understood. Her quarters were luxurious, a beautiful cage. Her duties were simple, maintain perfection in a space that felt already dead. Mr. Kang moved through his days with robotic precision. He appeared at 6:30 for tea he barely touched. He took meetings with grim-faced men who spoke in low Korean. He vanished into his forbidden wing for hours. The 2 bodyguards, Min-jun and Yi, were silent sentinels, their expressions as readable as stone. But Evelyn had been a cook. She noticed things. The way Mr. Kang would sometimes pause by the large window at dusk, perfectly still. The complete absence of personal photographs, except for one small, silver-framed picture on a high bookshelf in the living room, too dusty to have been touched recently. It showed a smiling Korean woman in a sun-drenched garden, holding the hand of a young boy. And then 3 days into her employment, she found the book. It was tucked behind others in the kitchen's decorative shelf, its spine cracked with age. A Korean cookbook, handwritten in Hangul and English. On the inside cover, in a delicate script, "For my son, Min-jun, so you never forget the taste of home. Oma." Evelyn's fingers traced the name. Min-jun, one of the bodyguards, but the dedication, the intimacy of it. She flipped through pages stained with old sauce and memories. One recipe for a stew called *galbajam was dog-eared, the notes in the margins frantic with adjustments. More soy. He likes it sweeter. Don't forget the sesame oil at the end. That night during one of Mr. Kang's late meetings, Evelyn heard raised voices from behind the closed conference room door. A crash like a glass breaking. Then Mr. Kang's voice, a low, dangerous wire of sound. Minutes later, the visitors left, their faces pale. Mr. Kang emerged alone. He didn't see Evelyn in the shadowed hallway. He walked to the bookshelf, picked up the dusty silver frame, and stared at the photograph of the woman and the boy for a full minute. His shoulders, usually a straight line of command, slumped ever so slightly. Then he set the frame down, wiped a hand over his face, and the mask was back. Something fractured in Evelyn that night. She saw it then, the isolation that mirrored her own, just wrapped in marble and silk. The boy in the photo was him, the woman his mother, and the bodyguard Min Jun named for him, a piece of a past he kept at a dusty distance. The idea was madness. It was overreach. It could get her fired, thrown out onto the street with Leo, but it rooted in her, this compulsion to bridge the silence with the one language she knew, food. To say, without words, I see your grief too. She studied the recipe like a sacred text. She used her advance pay to source the ingredients from a specialty market in Koreatown, the elderly shopkeeper eyeing her with polite curiosity. The day she chose was a Tuesday, his lightest meeting day. She waited until he'd retreated to his wing, and the bodyguards were at their posts by the elevator. The kitchen became her sanctuary. She seasoned the short ribs, letting the soy and pear marinade work. She minced the garlic, sliced the radishes, her movements a focused prayer. The dish would be imperfect, she knew that. Her kimchi was store-bought, her gochujang paste not the brand from the note. But it was the attempt, the smell of ginger and garlic hitting the hot pot, that she hoped would speak. As the stew simmered, the apartment filling with a deep, savory fragrance that felt achingly like a home she'd never known, Min Jun, the bodyguard, appeared in the kitchen doorway. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before turning away. Moment of truth. She ladled the stew into his mother's own ceramic bowl, which she'd found clean but unused at the back of a cabinet. She carried it to the dining table, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. The door to the west wing opened. Mr. Kang stepped out, followed by Yi. He stopped. His nostrils flared. His eyes locked on the bowl, then on her face, a storm of confusion and something like alarm gathering in his expression. He walked to the table slowly, as if in a trance. He sat. He picked up the spoon. The entire world narrowed to that single, fragile arc of pottery moving toward his lips. The taste was not a memory, it was a time machine. The first bite transported Min Jun Kang, the man who built an empire on emotional control, back to a small kitchen in Seoul. The steam carried the scent of his mother's apron, of charcoal heat from the floor stove, of a security he had not felt in 22 years. The flavor was close, achingly close, but the texture of the radish was wrong, cut too thick, and the balance of sweet to savory was off by a half measure. It was imperfect, and that imperfection was what broke him. Because his mother's dish was never imperfect. A sound escaped him, a ragged half-gasp he didn't recognize as his own. His vision blurred. The weight of 2 decades of composure, of being the unshakable Sajangnam to his men, the ruthless negotiator to his rivals, the ghost in his own home, collapsed under the weight of a single radish. He dropped the spoon. It clattered against the ceramic bowl, the noise shockingly loud in the silent room. He brought a hand to his face, his shoulders curling inward as a sob, raw and uncontained, tore from his chest. Evelyn stood frozen, her own breath held. She had expected anger, cold dismissal, termination. She had not prepared for this cataclysm. Behind Mr. Kang, the 2 bodyguards, Min Jun and Yi, were statues coming to life. Yi, the younger one, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek, but his eyes had turned glassy. Min Jun, the older guard, the one who shared the name in the cookbook, did not look away. He watched his bosses unraveling with an expression of profound, pained understanding. Then slowly, he reached up and adjusted his tie, a futile gesture to maintain order, but his hand was trembling. The silence that followed was thicker than the one before. It was filled with the echo of the sob, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren 60 floors below. Mr. Kang did not move for a full minute, his face shielded. When he finally lowered his hand, his eyes were bloodshot, but his features were already reassembling into a colder, harder mask. He did not look at Evelyn. He looked at the bowl. "Who gave you this recipe?" His voice was scraped raw, but the command in it was absolute. Evelyn's mouth was dry. I found a book. In the kitchen, it was handwritten. Mr. Kang's head turned slowly toward Min Jun, the bodyguard. A silent communication passed between them, a history Evelyn couldn't decipher. Min Jun gave a single grave nod. "Leave us," Mr. Kang said, the words directed at the air between Evelyn and the guards. Yi moved immediately, stepping back and turning toward the foyer. Min Jun hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes lingering on Evelyn with a warning she couldn't interpret before following. The elevator chimed softly, and they were gone. Mr. Kang stood up from the table, pushing the chair back with a slow, deliberate scrape. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, his silhouette a dark cutout against the glittering city. The bowl of stew sat between them, still steaming, a fragrant, damning centerpiece. "Explain," he said to the window. Evelyn's mind raced. "I saw the picture, the one on the shelf, and the book, it had her notes. I thought, I'm sorry, it was a terrible overstep." "Why?" he interrupted, still not turning. "Why would you do this? You have been here 1 week. You have a child to support. You risk everything for a gesture." "Because I see you," Evelyn whispered, the truth tumbling out before she could cage it. "Not the boss, the man at the window, the one who looks at that picture like it's a ghost. I know what that's like, to carry a ghost." Mr. Kang was silent for so long she thought he hadn't heard. Then he spoke, his voice low and distant. "Her name was Jin. She made this dish every Sunday, without fail. The recipe you used, it is her first draft, from before I was born. The notes in the margin are her father's corrections." He finally turned. His face was a calm lake again, but the storm was still visible in its depths. "How did you know which recipe to choose?" "The page was worn," she said, "the most stained. I guessed it was important." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his features. It was her test recipe. When she was learning from her mother, she was never satisfied with it. She called it her first ghost. He walked back to the table but did not sit. He looked at the stew, then at Evelyn. "You made a ghost, and you woke one." "What happens now?" Evelyn asked, bracing for the blow. "Now," Mr. Kang said, "you will tell me about your ghost." It wasn't a request. It was an exchange. A vulnerability for a vulnerability. So in the quiet, charged space of the dining room, with the city sprawling beneath them, Evelyn spoke. She spoke of her mother, a vibrant, chaotic chef who dreamed of her own restaurant, who filled their small apartment with impossible smells and louder laughter. She spoke of the ovarian cancer that stole her in 6 brutal months when Evelyn was 16. She spoke of the last thing her mother ever cooked for her, a simple carbonara, imperfect because she was too weak to properly crisp the pancetta, and how the memory of that flawed, loving dish had propelled her to culinary school, and how the failure to recreate it perfectly had haunted every restaurant kitchen she'd ever worked in. Mr. Kang listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded as if filing the information away. "My mother died in a traffic accident," he said, the statement stark and unadorned. "I was 12. My father followed 6 months later. They called it a broken heart. I called it weakness. This business," he gestured vaguely around the penthouse, "it was built so no one could ever make me feel that weak again." He picked up the spoon again, dipped it into the stew, and took another deliberate bite. He chewed slowly, analytically. "The sesame oil is added too early. It has turned bitter. The pear and the marinade should be grated, not pureed. It makes the meat mushy." Evelyn flushed. "I'm sorry." "Do not apologize," he said, his tone shifting into something resembling instruction. "You worked from an inferior text. Next Sunday, you will make it again. Min Jun will provide you with the correct recipe. The statement was so unexpected, so far from termination that Evelyn could only stare. Next Sunday. It is a waste to have a cook in the house who does not cook, he stated, as if it were simple logic. And this, he looked at the bowl. This needs to be done correctly. For the first time, his eyes met hers directly, and the coldness in them had thawed, replaced by a terrifying, focused intensity. You have opened a door, Evelyn. We do not close it, we walk through it, and we see what is on the other side. He turned and walked toward his private wing, leaving her alone with the remnants of the meal and the seismic shift in her world. The door to the west wing closed with a soft, definitive click. The following days passed in a surreal new normal. Mr. Kang's routine remained, the 6:30 tea, the meetings, the silence, but the air had changed. He began to acknowledge her with a slight nod in the mornings. Once he paused in the kitchen as she was polishing glasses and said, "The galbajam, you will need Korean radish, not daikon. They are different." Then he was gone. True to his word, the bodyguard Min Jun approached her the next afternoon. He handed her a single sheet of rice paper covered in elegant, faded hangul. "This is the final version," he said, his voice a low rumble. "From Halmione, from his mother's last year. Do not lose it." Evelyn took the paper, feeling the weight of the trust being offered. "Thank you, Min Jun SSI." The guard studied her, his face an impassive mask, but his eyes held a complexity she was starting to recognize. "He asked me to give you this as well," he said, producing a small old photograph from his pocket. It was a color image, faded at the edges, of a young Hai-Jin Kang standing at a stove, laughing over her shoulder at the photographer, a wooden spoon in her hand. The kitchen was warm, cluttered, alive. It was the polar opposite of the sterile penthouse. "He wants you to see what you are trying to recreate," Min Jun said softly. "Not just the taste, the feeling." "Who are you to him?" Evelyn dared to ask, holding the photo. Min Jun's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I was his mother's driver's son. We grew up in the same house. She named me after her favorite childhood friend." He paused, choosing his words. "After she died, I made a promise, to him and to her. That is all you need to know." He left her with the recipe and the photo, and Evelyn understood that she was no longer just a housekeeper. She had become a participant in a private ritual of remembrance, one with rules and guardians she barely understood. Sunday arrived. The penthouse was preternaturally quiet. Mr. Kang had cleared his schedule. The bodyguards were present but seemed to hover at a greater distance, giving the kitchen a wide berth. This time, Evelyn cooked with the photograph propped on the counter. She grated the pear. She found the correct, shorter Korean radish. She added the sesame oil at the very last moment, just before serving. The aroma was deeper, richer, more nuanced. She placed the bowl before him at the dining table just as she had the week before. He sat. He inhaled, closing his eyes. This time when he tasted it, he did not break. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, but he did not hide it. He nodded once. "Closer," he said, his voice thick, "much closer." Then he did something extraordinary. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." Evelyn hesitated, then obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat. He ate slowly, methodically, as if deconstructing each flavor. "My mother," he began, "spoke of food as love made visible. She said you could taste the intention in the cook's hands. Your intention last week was courage. This week it is respect. I can taste the difference." They did not speak again until the bowl was empty. He set down his spoon with finality. "There is a problem," he said. Evelyn's heart sank, "Sir." "The problem is that you are a gifted cook wasting your talent polishing silver," he stated. "And I have a restaurant." The statement hung in the air, nonsensical. A restaurant. A holding, an investment, a fine dining establishment in the West Village that has been underperforming for 3 years. The head chef lacks soul. He looked at her, his businessman's calculus visibly warring with something else. "I want you to redesign the menu. Start with one dish. This one." Evelyn's mind reeled. "You want to serve your mother's galbajam in a restaurant?" No, he corrected. I want to serve asterisk your asterisk version of my mother's galbajam, the one that is still searching for its perfect form, the one that carries two ghosts now, not just one. That is a story people will taste. And stories, he added, echoing his mother's philosophy without realizing it, are the only thing worth selling. It was an impossible offer, a fantasy, and it was a trap. Evelyn knew it. To accept meant stepping out of the safe, invisible role of housekeeper and into the glaring, uncertain light of his world. It meant her success and her son's future would be irrevocably tied to Min Jun Kang and the shadows he operated in. Before she could answer, the elevator chimed. An unscheduled arrival. Min Jun and Yi moved instantly, positioning themselves between the dining area and the foyer. Mr. Kang's face hardened back into its neutral mask. A man emerged from the elevator, flanked by two others Evelyn didn't recognize. He was older than Mr. Kang, with silver streaks in his hair and a sharp, displeased face. He spoke in rapid, clipped Korean. Mr. Kang stood, his chair scraping back. He replied in kind, his tone cool but edged with warning. The older man's eyes swept the room, landing on Evelyn, then on the empty bowl on the table. He said something that made Mr. Kang's fists clench at his sides. The older man's gaze locked on Evelyn again, and he switched to heavily accented English. So you are the new variable, the cook. I hear you are making our Minjun soft. He took a step forward, but Minjun the bodyguard shifted, blocking his path subtly. The older man smiled, a cold, mirthless thing. He looked back at Mr. Kang. Sentiment is a leak, nephew. It weakens the hull, and we are in deep water. With a last, dismissive glance at Evelyn, he turned and left, his men following. The elevator doors closed, sealing in a silence that now crackled with a new, more dangerous kind of tension. Mr. Kang did not move for a long moment. When he turned to Evelyn, the vulnerability from moments before was gone, burned away by a cold fire. The offer stands, he said, his voice low. But you should understand what you are accepting. That man is my uncle. He believes what I have built is his, and he now believes you are a point of leverage. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. To cook in my world is not just to feed. It is to take a side. So I will ask you once clearly. Do you want to just make the stew, Evelyn, or do you want to own the restaurant? Evelyn looked at the empty bowl, at the ghost of the meal that had started this, and then at the man who had just redefined her future as a battlefield. I want to own it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Kang nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Good, you will begin tomorrow. Minjun will take you to the property. You will have a budget, a staff, and 8 weeks. At the end of 8 weeks, we host a soft opening. Critics, investors, and my uncle will be invited. If it succeeds, the restaurant is yours in title and in profit share. If it fails... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The consequence was in the air, as tangible as the lingering scent of ginger. The restaurant was called High, a single, elegant character etched on frosted glass. Inside, it was all cool grays and muted lighting, beautiful but soulless, exactly as he described. The existing staff, a sous chef named Marco and a skeleton crew, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and open resentment. She was the boss's pet project, a housekeeper playing chef. Her first act was to take down the existing, overly complex menu. Her second was to tape the photograph of Hai Jin Kang to the pass. This is our inspiration, she told the skeptical team. We are not cooking for Michelin. We are cooking for a memory. The work was all-consuming. Evelyn spent her days at High and her late nights back at the penthouse, where Leo, now enrolled in a secure private daycare nearby, would be waiting, often already put to bed by a kindly, silent woman Mr. Kang had hired. The guilt was a constant ache, soothed only by the fierce certainty that this was for him, for their future. But the uncle's shadow was long. A week in, her primary supplier of short ribs called to cancel their contract, citing unforeseen circumstances. The next day, the restaurant's health inspection was suddenly and aggressively moved up. Minjun handled it, a few calls, a discreet envelope, and the inspector left with a smile. Evelyn saw the transaction from the kitchen doorway, her stomach turning. "This is how it works," Minjun said to her afterward, his face impassive. "You focus on the food, we focus on the walls." But the interference escalated. A local food blogger published a scathing, premature review of Hai, calling it a mafia-fronted folly before a single public dish had been served. The piece contained a disturbingly accurate description of the galbajam recipe Evelyn was developing. Someone inside was talking. Paranoia became her new sous chef. She looked at Marco and his team differently. She started changing recipe details at the last minute, keeping the true final version only in her head. Then the phone call came. It was Leo's new daycare. There had been a man, they said, asking questions about pickup times about the boy's mother. He'd left when challenged, but they were concerned. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She called Mr. Kang, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. He was at the restaurant within 20 minutes, his expression a carved monument to fury. He spoke to Min Jun in a low, furious Korean. That night, 2 new men appeared outside the daycare, and Leo was moved to a different, undisclosed location with a full-time caretaker. Evelyn was allowed to see him for 2 hours each evening under guard. "They are testing my resolve," Mr. Kang told her, his eyes cold. "Using your love as a probe, we must push harder. We open in 5 weeks, not 8. The pressure cooker of time and threat transformed the kitchen at High. Evelyn's grief for her mother, her fear for her son, her dawning understanding of Mr. Kang's isolated grief, all of it got braised into the food. The galbajam evolved. It became richer, deeper, the initial sweetness giving way to a complex, slow-burn heat that echoed the journey of morning itself. She called it First Ghost on the tentative menu. Marco, the skeptical sous chef, tasted the 5th iteration one afternoon. He was silent for a full minute after swallowing. Then he looked at Evelyn, his earlier resentment gone. "Okay," he said. "I get it now. What do you need?" The team began to coalesce, not around a boss, but around a mission. They were underdogs in a war they didn't fully understand, and it bonded them. 3 weeks to the new opening date, the uncle struck directly. Evelyn arrived at High at dawn to find the front window shattered, glass glittering across the polished concrete floor. Spray painted across the interior wall in angry red Hangul was a single word: Ko Munghesa Inus. It's over. She stood amidst the wreckage, feeling the fight drain out of her. This was insanity. She was a single mother playing restaurant in the middle of a gang war. Mr. Kang arrived minutes later. He didn't look at the graffiti, he looked at her face. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Good." He turned to Min Jun, who was examining the broken window. "This is amateur intimidation. He is getting desperate. It means we are winning." "Winning?" Evelyn gestured at the destruction. "This is winning." He finally looked at the graffiti. A grim smile touched his lips. "He is telling me it's over, but he is asking. That is a weakness." He turned back to her. "My mother used to say that a cracked bowl still holds food, sometimes better than a perfect one. The restaurant opens in 3 weeks. We will serve the first meal in front of this wall." And they did. Construction crews worked round the clock, not just repairing but transforming. The exposed brick around the graffiti was preserved, framed like a piece of art, a scar they refused to hide. The message became part of the restaurant's story. The night before the soft opening, Evelyn was in the penthouse, going over last-minute notes, when Mr. Kang summoned her to the living room. He was not alone. An elderly Korean woman, her back straight as a ruler, her hair a crown of silver, sat on the sofa. Min Jun stood behind her, his posture one of deep respect. "Evelyn, this is Kim Sunya," Mr. Kang said, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "She was my mother's cooking teacher, her Sunsing asterisk. She has come from Seoul." The old woman's eyes, sharp and miss-nothing, appraised Evelyn. Minjun sent me the recipe you are using, she said in clear, precise English, and he told me of the photograph. May I taste? In the penthouse kitchen, with Mr. Kang watching silently from the doorway, Evelyn prepared first ghost one more time. Her hands trembled under the woman's gaze. She served it in a simple bowl. Kim Soon-ya ate slowly, her eyes closed. The room was so quiet Evelyn could hear the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator. When she opened her eyes, they were bright with tears. She looked at Mr. Kang. She has her hands, Min Juna, not your mother's hands, but the same heart. The ghost is not a copy. It is a cousin. She turned to Evelyn. This is good. You understand the difference between memory and mimicry. That is the secret. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. This was Hyjin's, her favorite tool. She would want you to have it now. It was a worn, beautifully crafted wooden spoon, the handle smoothed by decades of use. Evelyn took it, the weight of it profound. After the teacher left, Mr. Kang remained, looking at the spoon in Evelyn's hand. Tomorrow changes everything, he said. For the restaurant, for you, for me. My uncle will be there. He will try something. What will you do? Evelyn asked. What I should have done years ago, he said. I will not fight his war on his terms. I will change the battlefield. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not just determination but a kind of peace. You showed me that. A dish does not need to be a fortress. It can be a bridge. Tomorrow we build a bridge, and we see who has the courage to cross. The morning of the soft opening dawned with a brittle tension. Hai was impeccable, the preserved graffiti wall now a dramatic focal point, lit with a soft, respectful glow. The staff moved with the focused energy of soldiers before a landing. At 6 p.m., the first guests arrived. Food critics from major publications, investors in sharp suits, and a handful of curious socialites. At 6:45, the uncle arrived. He came with 4 men, not 2. He made a show of examining the graffiti, a smirk on his face. He took his seat at the best table in the house, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing weakness. Evelyn was in the kitchen, the final checks complete, her mother's carbonara recipe card and Hyjin's wooden spoon tucked in her apron for luck. She looked through the pass window and saw Mr. Kang standing alone in the dining room, greeting guests. He looked not like a crime boss, but like a host, vulnerable, exposed. Marco touched her shoulder. Chef, they're seated, it's time. Evelyn took a deep breath, the aromas of garlic, pear, and sesame oil wrapping around her like armor. She nodded. Send the first course. The meal was a revelation. Each dish was a stripped-down, emotionally charged version of Korean comfort food, culminating in first ghost. Evelyn watched from the kitchen as the guests took their first bites. She saw eyebrows raise, heads tilt in contemplation, then soft sighs of pleasure. She saw a critic put down her fork, close her eyes, and simply breathe for a moment. At the uncle's table, the reaction was different. He ate the galbijam with a stony face. But his men, the tough-looking enforcers, were less guarded. One of them, a burly man with scarred knuckles, ate his entire portion quickly, then looked at the empty bowl with an expression of startled longing. During the dessert course, the uncle stood up. He tapped his water glass with a knife. The room fell silent. He smiled, a predatory show of teeth. A beautiful meal, nephew, truly. It reminds me of my sister, so fragile, so easily broken. He paused, letting the insult hang. But business is business. And while you have been playing restaurateur, your interests at the docks have been feeling neglected. I have taken the liberty of consolidating them. For the family's good, of course. It was a public coup. A declaration of war in a room full of civilians. Every eye turned to Mr. Kang. He did not look angry, he looked resolved. He stood. Thank you, uncle, he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room. You are right. I have been distracted by memory, by grief, by the attempt to build something that lasts rather than simply control what exists. He walked toward his uncle's table. The docks, the shipments, the territory you crave, you can have them. A ripple of shocked surprise went through the uncle's men. The uncle himself blinked, off balance for the first time. This was not the reaction he'd expected. Mr. Kang continued, "I am dissolving my interests in those traditional sectors. The capital is being transferred here, into this restaurant, into a new culinary foundation in my mother's name, into legitimate enterprises that do not require men with guns to protect them." He stopped, standing directly before his uncle. "You win the old world, uncle. I am building a new one." He turned to address the entire room. The tension had transformed into something electric, confused. "Ladies and gentlemen, my uncle has reminded me that food and family are often intertwined in complicated ways. Please enjoy the rest of your dessert. The bar is open all night. For everyone here tonight, dinner is on the house. A fresh start." The gamble was breathtaking. He had not fought. He had surrendered his power publicly and completely and reframed it as a choice. The uncle stood frozen, his victory suddenly tasting like ash. He had come to crush a rival and instead had been outmaneuvered into irrelevance, in front of witnesses. He left without another word, his men following in confused silence. The party, after a stunned moment, resumed, now buzzing with a frantic, gossipy energy. Mr. Kang made his way back to the kitchen. He pushed through the double doors and found Evelyn, Marco, and the entire staff waiting, having heard everything over the speaker. He looked at Evelyn. "The bridge is built," he said. "It is yours to hold." Then he did something he had never done before. He took off his tailored suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and nodded toward the dish pit. "Now," he said, "let's get this kitchen clean." As he passed by Evelyn, his shoulder brushed hers and he spoke so only she could hear. "The ghost is laid to rest. What comes next is entirely up to you." The review in the New York Times the following Wednesday was not just a review. It was an obituary for one life and a birth announcement for another. The critic, a famously hard-to-please man, led with the graffiti. "At high, the most compelling ingredient on the menu is not for eating," he wrote. "It's a scar on the wall, a Korean word for it's over, preserved under glass. This sets the stage for a meal that is less a dinner and more an exorcism." Chef Evelyn Clark's first ghost braised short rib is a masterpiece of culinary empathy, a dish that tastes not of perfection, but of longing, memory, and the fierce, flawed love that persists after loss. In a city of fleeting trends, high feels permanent. It feels like truth. The piece triggered a chain reaction. Reservations, which had been a trickle of the curious, became a flood. The story of the housekeeper, the boss, and the stew that changed everything seeped out, becoming an irresistible modern fable. High was booked solid for 6 months. Evelyn's life transformed overnight. She was no longer a housekeeper. She was a chef owner. The legal transfer of the restaurant's title and a 49% equity stake was completed within a week, the paperwork handled by a new, sharply polite lawyer from Mr. Kang's now entirely legitimate holding company. The other 51% was placed in a trust for Leo, a fact that left Evelyn speechless when she read the documents. Minjun Kang, meanwhile, was a man dismantling his own myth. True to his word, he systematically dissolved his interests in the docks, the gray market import channels, the protection rackets. There were negotiations, some tense, some surprisingly amicable. His uncle, it turned out, was less effective as a sole ruler than he was as a jealous rival. The consolidated operations began to fray almost immediately under infighting and increased police scrutiny. The uncle's power, built on imitation and aggression, began to crumble. Mr. Kang did not return to the penthouse. He moved into a smaller, sun-filled apartment near the restaurant. The forbidding west wing was emptied. The only thing he took was the silver-framed photograph of his mother. The penthouse itself was quietly put on the market. 1 month after the opening, he walked into High not as an owner but as a customer. He was alone. He took a seat at the chef's counter and ordered the tasting menu. Evelyn cooked for him herself, each course a silent conversation. When first Ghost arrived, he ate it slowly, his expression peaceful. After the meal, he gestured for her. "It is better than hers," he said simply. Evelyn shook her head. That's not true, it's different. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face. That is what makes it better. It is alive. Hers is a memory. This is a living thing. He paid his bill, leaving a tip that made the server's eyes widen, and left. Their relationship had found its new axis, respected former employer and successful protege. A clean, clear line. But the story had one final, unexpected twist. 8 weeks after the opening, on a rainy Tuesday night, the uncle walked in. He was alone. He looked older, diminished, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose. He stood in the entrance, water dripping from his coat, ignoring the hostess. His eyes found Evelyn at the pass. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Marco subtly moved a heavy skillet closer to his hand. Min-jun, the bodyguard, who now worked officially as the restaurant's security consultant, took a step forward from his post by the door. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and walked out from behind the counter. She met him in the space between the tables, the preserved graffiti wall looming beside them. "Mr. Kim," she said, her voice level, "do you have a reservation?" He ignored the question, his eyes darting to the red hangul on the wall, then back to her. "I want to taste it," he said, his voice rough. "The ghost." Evelyn considered him. She saw not a tyrant, but a tired, bitter old man who had lost his way in a world of shadows. She nodded to the hostess. "Table 14, please." She cooked his meal herself. She plated it with care. She brought it to his table and set it down before him. He stared at the bowl as if it contained a live coal. Then, with a trembling hand, he picked up the spoon. He took a bite. He chewed. And then this hardened, ruthless man who had built an empire on intimidation put his face in his hands and wept, silently, his shoulders shaking. It was not the violent, surprised sob of his nephew. It was the slow, deep weeping of a decades-old frost finally thawing. He did not finish the bowl. When he had composed himself, he looked at Evelyn, his eyes red-rimmed. "It tastes like my sister's voice," he whispered. "I had forgotten." He stood, left a stack of $100 bills on the table, and walked out into the rain. He never returned, but a week later, a delivery arrived at the restaurant. A case of rare, artisanal soy sauce from a specific region of South Korea, with a note that read only, "For the kitchen." The final loop closed not with a bang, but with a quiet, private ceremony. On the one-year anniversary of the soft opening, Evelyn and Leo, now 5, went to the beach house. Mr. Kang had kept it. He was there waiting for them. He had something to show her, he said. In the airy, sunlit living room, he presented her with a simple wooden box. Inside, nestled in silk, was the original stained, handwritten cookbook. And next to it, on a bed of black velvet, was a single, perfect porcelain spoon. "This was my mother," he said. "Her favorite for special occasions. I want you to have it." Evelyn shook her head, overwhelmed. "Min-jun, I can't. This is a family heirloom." "You and Leo are my family," he said, the words simple and devastating in their truth. "The only one I have chosen. The only one that is not born from blood or obligation." He took the spoon from the box. "And this is not for you to keep locked away. It is for you to use, every night, to feed your son, to create your own special occasions." He looked at Leo, who was peering curiously at the spoon. "Your grandmother would have loved you very much," he told the boy. "She would have fed you until you popped." Leo giggled. "Can you make the stew, Mr. Min?" Mr. Kang looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded. That evening they cooked together in the beach house kitchen. Mr. Kang grated the pear. Evelyn seasoned the meat. Leo, on a step stool, carefully added the sesame seeds at the end, his small tongue poked out in concentration. They used Hyjin's wooden spoon and her porcelain spoon. They set the table for 3, looking out at the darkening ocean. The dish they made that night was perfect. Not because it flawlessly replicated a lost memory, but because it was something entirely new. It was a fusion of 3 ghosts, Hyjin's, Evelyn's mother, and the ghost of the man Min Jun Kang used to be transformed into a living, nourishing present. As they ate, Mr. Kang told Leo a story about his mother, about how she once tried to cook spaghetti and used gochujang instead of tomato paste. Leo laughed so hard he almost fell off his chair. The sound echoed in the warm, lit room, pushing back against the vast, dark sea outside. The empire of control was gone. In its place was a restaurant that thrived, a foundation in hygiene's name that funded culinary scholarships for single mothers, and this, a chosen family, gathered around a table, eating a ghost that had finally, peacefully been laid to rest. Evelyn kept the penthouse job in a way. She became the curator of his new life, not its cleaner. She made sure there were always fresh flowers in his apartment, that his calendar was balanced, that he remembered to eat. He, in turn, became Leo's de facto godfather, attending school plays and teaching him how to properly hold a chef's knife when he was old enough. The bodyguards, Min Jun and Yi, found new roles too. Min Jun became the stoic, beloved floor manager at High, his intimidating presence perfect for handling difficult customers. Yi, who had a surprising knack for numbers, went back to school for accounting and managed the books for both the restaurant and the foundation. The last surprise was the simplest and the most profound. One afternoon, while helping Evelyn inventory the restaurant's pantry, Mr. Kang found a forgotten box at the back of a high shelf. It was filled with his mother's other kitchen tools, whisks, ladles, measuring cups. Instead of putting them away, he brought them to the restaurant. He had a glass case installed in the entryway. Inside, under soft light, he arranged Hygiene's tools alongside the wooden spoon from her teacher, the porcelain spoon, and a copy of the first ghost recipe in Evelyn's handwriting. The plaque read, "The hands that feed us." It was no longer a shrine to a ghost. It was a monument to continuity, to the idea that love, like a good recipe, could be passed down, adapted, and made new by each generation that dared to try. The man who once forbade a door to be opened had now glassed in his most tender memories for anyone to see. The final surrender, the ultimate strength. And every night when the last customer left and the kitchen was clean, Evelyn would take down Hygiene's porcelain spoon and taste the day's stew. It was never exactly the same. Some days it was a little sweeter, some days a little bolder. That was the point. It was alive, a first ghost that had learned how to breathe. So what was this story really about? It wasn't about a stew or a restaurant or a gangster's redemption. It was about the quiet, revolutionary power of an imperfect gesture. We build fortresses around our pain. We call them control or independence or strength. Min Jun Kang built his of marble and money and silence. Evelyn built hers of survival and solitude. And for a time, those fortresses work. They keep the world out, but they also seal the ghosts in. All it took was one person with nothing to lose but her last chance to knock on the door with a bowl of something warm. Not perfect, just trying. Neuroscience calls it the Proust effect, the direct line from taste to memory to emotion, bypassing all our careful defenses. We can armor our hearts, but we cannot armor our tongues. Memory is a backdoor into the most fortified soul. The bravest thing Evelyn did was not cooking the dish. It was serving it. It was the vulnerable act of saying, "I see you," without knowing if the person seen would respond with gratitude or annihilation. The bravest thing Min Jun did was not tasting it. It was allowing himself to be seen, shattered in front of his own men. In that moment, the hierarchy of power inverted. The strongest person in the room was the one who could finally stop pretending to be strong. Their story asks a simple, terrifying question. What fortresses have you built? And what would it take for you to open the gate? Not with a grand declaration, but with an imperfect offering. A text you're afraid to send, a meal you're not sure you can make, a quiet "I need help" after years of "I'm fine." The legacy of Hyjin Kang wasn't a recipe locked in a book. It was the proof that love is not a finite resource to be lost, but a skill to be passed on, like how to fold a dumpling or when to add the sesame oil. Her son learned to wield power. Evelyn learned to wield memory. And together, they learned to build a table where both could sit and a future where both could thrive. We all have our first ghosts, the dreams that didn't work out, the loves that ended, the people we miss so deeply it feels like a physical weather inside us. The choice isn't whether to live with them. The choice is how. Do we let them haunt us, or do we invite them to dinner? Do we let the past be a tomb or a kitchen? If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a ghost you carry or a bridge you've been afraid to build, then you're why we tell these tales. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Your support helps us find and share more stories about the messy, beautiful, human work of becoming. And the next time you smell something that stops you in your tracks, old books, rain on concrete, a dish from a childhood kitchen, pause. Listen. It might not just be a memory, it might be a ghost asking for a place at your table. All you have to do is set an extra plate,